Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wine Simplified, a wine podcast for cork dorks and those who want to be. I am your host, Carrie, also known as Winecita. That is the name of my blog and website. I am a WSET Level 3 certified wine educator with a background in education and a passion for all things vino. I currently serve as the wine lead at the Good Pour Wine and Spirits Marketplace in Longwood, Florida. This store isn't a sponsor of this podcast or affiliated with it, but if you happen to find yourself in the area, please stop by and say hello. So let's get started. Hi, everyone. I am so excited to kick off this first episode with you. Whether you are brand new to wine or you have been sipping your way through different bottles for a while and just still feel really unsure about all of the lingo, this is the right place. So, I want to strip it all down to the basics today. This is literally episode one of the series. So, let's just start with a really simple question. And if you feel like I already know this, hopefully, I'll have some other episodes here in the future that you can skip ahead to. But really, a lot of people find wine to be very, very overwhelming. And so, as the former educator in me, I like to strip it all down to the basics and then build up from there. So, what really is wine? Wine, in its simplest form, is fermented grape juice, but it's not made with just any grapes. I've had people ask me before, why can't I just take a grape from the grocery store and turn it into a great bottle of wine? That you can't do that because wine grapes are a very specific type of grape from the species Vitis vinifera. These grapes are smaller, they're sweeter, they have more seeds and thicker skins than the grapes that you would snack on from the grocery store. And while people do ferment all different types of fruit, apples, cherries, uh, dandelion wine gets made. I've never had it. Not sure that I want to try it. But only grape based versions can legally be labeled as wine, in quotes, wine. Wine can be made as still wine or sparkling wine. So your sparkling wines like your champagne and your proseccos, red, white, rosé wines. Those are going to be the varying colors, or even orange wine. So skin contact wine off of a white grape. It can be bone dry, so a very dry wine, or really, really sweet, syrupy sweet. A lot of Moscatos. A lot of people tend to start their palate on sweet wines. But at its core, it all starts the same way with grapes and that little bit of magic called fermentation. As a quick dip into history, wine has been around really forever. Archaeologists will believe it dates back to, 8,000 or 10,000 years ago, likely in the Caucasus Mountains, which is modern day Georgia, not the state, the country of Georgia. From there, it spread through Mesopotamia, Egypt, Rome, Greece. And by the time the Romans were throwing these really lavish banquets, wine had become a cultural staple and really a symbol of status and celebration. So, if we fast forward and skip through all of those centuries, which wine played a role in all of them, but if we skip through to today, wine's really made all over the world. Our old world, France, Italy, Spain to New World, Argentina, New Zealand, and then, of course, right here in the United States. And not just Napa. Napa really put United States wine on the map, but now we've got wine in a lot of other really cool regions. Obviously, Oregon, Walla Walla, Washington, Columbia Valley, Finger Lakes, even Texas. So the global wine scene is incredibly diverse, and that's what is really part of what makes it fun to explore. In upcoming episodes, I will hopefully get to breaking down region by regions. I could be at this for years, though. There is a lot to learn and a lot to study. Let's talk about the magic of fermentation, the science behind it. I am not a science major. Did have to study this, but definitely not a chemist or a physicist. So I'll try to keep it as simple as possible, keep it casual. Basically, what happens when you're making wine or in fermentation is fermentation happens when yeast, a microorganism, will eat the sugar in the grapes and they convert it to alcohol and carbon dioxide. So sugar plus yeast equals alcohol plus CO2. I will remind you of that in the next episode when we'll go kind of further into grape to glass. But basically, this process with the yeast eating the sugar will happen naturally with wild yeast. So a lot of our natural wines or organic wines can happen naturally with these wild yeast, even non-certified organic. A lot of winemakers choose to just use the natural yeast. However, there are some cultivated yeasts that winemakers will add intentionally if they need to kind of adjust that fermentation process. The environment, the grape, and that fermentation vessel. So, whether it's stainless steel or an amphora, concrete egg, or an oak barrel, will all play a role in the final taste of the wine. So, a lot of it can involve, not just the grape, but winemaker intervention as well. Some wines will go through a second fermentation, like sparkling wines, and some wines will age for months or even years after fermentation is done before it even gets bottled and sold to the consumer. I'll get to that later. For now, just remember that fermentation is what turns grape juice into wine. What about vintage? You've probably seen the word vintage on a bottle. Vintage is simply the year that the grapes were harvested, not necessarily the year it's sold, the year the grapes were harvested. And this matters because weather is unpredictable. A rainy season might make grapes much more diluted, whereas a hot, dry season can really concentrate the sugars and flavors, which is why the same wine, the same bottle from year to year can taste a little bit different. Even this different vineyards in the same year can taste a little bit different. Some wines don't have a vintage listed. These are called non-vintage or NV. You might see that. They're usually blends from multiple years, and mostly with sparkling wines. So think champagne, where they'll always kind of blend in a vintage from a previous year to maintain a house style. Personally, across the board, I am not vintage specific. I will look up which years are better than others in some areas, but I think that every year tells a story. And if you find a vintage you enjoy, buy several bottles of it to see how the wine evolves over the years. But remember that wine is finite, and when a vintage is gone, it's gone. So don't get angry at your local wine store if they can't get a certain vintage back. But truthfully, I just like exploring each wine for the year that it comes from. They'd have to really be side by side for me to tell a difference. But if you find a year that you really love and want to be specific for that year, buy a case of it and then explore it, 2, 5, 10 years down the road. I want to keep this short and simple. If your head is spinning already, don't worry. I'm just getting started. So, we've talked about vintage, fermentation, just kind of that brief what is wine. I want this show to be a guide to wine, an education to wine, but to open up conversation and to be able to make it in chunks that are easy to understand and accessible. We don't need to swirl quite yet like a sommelier unless you want to. I will maybe explain that in the future why we do that. But there's absolutely no shame here if you like your red wine cold or enjoy a white Zinfandel or Moscato, wherever you're at. I want this show to be for you. And I want you to feel comfortable walking into a wine shop or ordering at a restaurant or picking up something fun to bring to a party. So please stick around for future episodes, subscribe, and if you enjoy what you hear, share it with a fellow wino friend. I would love that. In my next episode, I'm going to explore the full journey from grape to glass and how wine is actually made. So, spoiler, it's more than just stomping grapes in a barrel, although that does sound like a lot of fun. But I hope to see you then.